Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. So in the video today, I'm going to address a question that I normally get from students who are about to take their IELTS exam, and that is, what style of English should they use? Now, usually they're talking about either using a British style or an American style. Well, the short answer to that is that in most official exams you should stick to just one style, but many students of English actually tend to mix them without thinking about it. So in this lesson we are going to clarify some of the main differences between British and American English, and also look at different areas of the language like pronunciation, spelling, grammar and vocabulary. So without further ado, let's get into the presentation right now. Okay, so the title for this presentation is actually called World English, and you can see that I have a variety of flags that represent countries where English is an official language. So you'll see that there are many places that you can go to with the English language. Now, as I mentioned before, the two styles of English that are normally compared, especially for official exams, are British and American English. So, how British or American, indeed, is your English? I'm going to bring up 7 words on the screen. Now, I'm not going to pronounce any of them until the next slide, but as I mentioned, most of the time people think that they speak only in a British way or only in an American way or in another way. But what you'll find is actually most people tend to mix some words and some expressions. Okay, so this is a little test for you. So I'll bring up each word one by one, and this is just a test of pronunciation. So how do you pronounce these words? Here's the first one. Okay, so how do you say that? Here's the second one. Okay, the third one. Fourth one. Here's the fifth. The sixth. And finally, the seventh, which actually isn't a word, it's just a letter. Okay, so let's take a look at the next screen and see some of the differences between the two styles. Okay, so I've underlined each part of the word on the left that has a different sound depending on if it's the British pronunciation or the American pronunciation. Now, I know not everyone knows the phonemic chart, so I've just put in the actual letters and given some comparisons in the two columns. So then, the word schedule can be pronounced like a sh in British English or a k sound in American English. So the Americans would say schedule. Now, interestingly, even though I'm from England, I would say schedule. So you can see that American English does have quite an influence even on British English. But most of these I would pronounce the British way for sure. So I'll go through them now. I'm going to say each word in turn, starting with the British version and then the American version. So let's see if what you pronounced matches what I pronounce. So then, schedule, schedule, data, data, water, water, laboratory, laboratory, tomato, tomato, vitamin, vitamin, and then Z, and the Americans would say Z, okay, XYZ instead of XYZ. So I'm interested to know if you pronounced them all the same way or if there was a little bit of a mix, because that's something to look out for, especially when you're speaking English, whether just naturally or even in an official exam. Okay. Next is spelling differences. Now, I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, but this will be mainly important for the writing exam, okay? And just maybe from the first look, you can see that the American spellings of these words are more phonetic than the British spelling. That means that they are spelled more like they are pronounced. And actually, there's no real difference in pronunciation here, no special difference between the two. It's just a matter of spelling. And there might be some examples here that you are not, that you may not have known about. So, for example, the last one, when you take a verb, for example, like travel or cancel, that ends in an L, when you add an inflection, so ing or ed, in British English, we double the L. But in American English, it's actually just a single L. So travel, traveled, or traveling would take two L's in British English and just one in American English. Okay? Right, moving on, grammatical differences. Now, this can lead many people to doubt some very basic expressions or basic things in English. So, for example, the use of perfect tenses are a little less common in American English when they can just use the past simple. So compare these two sentences. If I say, have you done your homework? Or did you do your homework? Which is correct? Well, I'm checking something that has happened in the past that has an effect on the present, but it is still technically a past tense. So both of them would be correct if I'm asking a student if they have done their homework. Now, I would maybe more so use the perfect tense, have you done your homework? But the Americans are much more likely to say, did you do your homework? And that would be fine. Some past participles. So I've got an example here. There's get, got, and get, got, gotten. Now, which do you think gotten is? Do you think it's British or American? A lot of people, when I do this in class, a lot of people think gotten is the British form, whereas actually it is the American form. I would not say I have gotten, that again, the T is softened into a D in American English in the middle of words, as you saw with the pronunciation task we did. So they would say, I have gotten or gotten used to it, whereas I would say, I have got used to it. Okay. Gotten is actually an Old English form. There are many Old English words that have been kept in American English and actually lost in modern British English. So that's something to be aware of as well. Even with the seasons. So the Americans would say spring, summer, fall, winter, where we would say spring, summer, autumn, winter. Fall is actually Old English that the Americans kept when the leaves fall from the trees. It makes sense. Anyway, now this one is quite an important one because it's seemingly so basic. So the use of singular and plural with teams, okay? So if you look here, the football team, Chelsea are winning 2-0. Now that is British English because with teams or groups, we tend to use the plural form of the verb. So Chelsea are, or the government, like one group if you like, have. Whereas in American English, they're more likely to use the singular. Chelsea is, or the government has. Okay, so you might not, it can be surprising when you hear both the singular and plural, but it's actually a style difference, not a language mistake. And then finally, some prepositions. So in British English, we're more likely to say at the weekend, and the Americans are more likely to say on the weekend. There's also some expressions like, I'll write to you soon. The Americans don't use to, they'll say, I'll write you soon. Whereas in British, we would never say something like that. We would always use the preposition to. So there are some important grammatical differences. However, the main difference between British and American English lies in the vocabulary. And how many differences are there? Well, there are quite a lot. But if you look at the whole language, there really aren't that many differences, okay? British and American English are very similar for the most part, but there are some key vocabulary differences. And now it's over to you to look at the worksheets on the next slide and decide if the word is British or American. Now, to make it a little bit harder, if you think the word is either British or American, think to yourself, what is the other word? Okay, so if you think the word's British, well, what do the Americans say? And vice versa, okay? When you're learning English, it's quite important to maybe know both, because you might hear both depending on what kind of person you're listening to, or even what film or movie you're watching. So then, here's the worksheet. I have a list of words in front of me, and it's up to you now to think if they are British or American, and then what is the equivalent word in the other style. So I'm going to ask you now to pause the video, okay? Because when we come back, we're going to go through the answers and the equivalents. So pause the video now and think, are these words either British or American? All right then, so how did it go? Did you manage to guess them? Let's take a look. So the first word is the word gearbox. I'll give you the pronunciation as well, in a car. Now that is British. The Americans would call it the transmission, okay? Cars are a later invention. The United States was a very much established country by the time the car was invented. So there tends to be quite a lot of vocabulary differences between the two when it comes to parts of a car. Okay, next, the pavement. You walk on the pavement. That, again, is British English. And the Americans would call it the sidewalk. Okay. Next is a tool. It's called a spanner, and that's British English again. The Americans would call it a wrench, and the W is silent. Okay, the next word, gasoline. Fill up your car with gas. That is American English. We would say petrol. Again, the Americans would call the place you go a gas station, and we would call it a petrol station. Okay, the road where you can drive quite fast is called a freeway in American English. In British English, we would call it the motorway. Next is a packet of crisps. That's very British English. The Americans would say a packet of crisps, like a packet of Lay's or Walkers, as we say over here. Now, chips is used, but that is for potato chips, like, sorry, not potato chips. That would be crisps. For fries, so we would say fish and chips, not fish and fries, like the Americans would. So there's a bit of a triangular meaning there. So look out for that one. Okay, next, for a baby, that is pacifier in American English, and it is a dummy in British English. Next, the subject, we call that maths in British English, and the Americans would just call it math without an S, both short for mathematics, just a different abbreviation. Okay, next, trousers. A pair of trousers in British English. In American English, a pair of pants. Whereas pants in British English would be underpants. Sneakers, very American. In British English, we would say a pair of trainers, so sports shoes. Next, now this is not laundry. These are not the clothes you need to wash. This is the shop where you go. And laundrette is what we would say in British English. The Americans would call it the laundromat. Okay, an eraser. So that's American English. In British English, we would call that a rubber. Trash, so take out the trash. That's American English. We would say take out the rubbish. And then finally, the back of a car, we would say that is the boot in British English. The Americans would say the trunk. Okay, so some key differences here. All right, finally. So, as I said at the beginning of the video, there is no correct form of English. You might have a form of English where you bring in some of your own vocabulary from another language. But it is important to stick to one style of English when taking the IELTS exam. If you speak a language where you bring in words from another language, I would not suggest doing that. Okay, always check what forms are acceptable in the exam beforehand. So really the main two that people focus on are British English or American English. Make sure you stick to one. But if you are in a situation where you can only think of a word from another style that you don't normally use, just use it. It's better than saying nothing. Okay? Right, that's all from me. So I hope you found that video useful. And don't forget that there are 2 video courses on this channel for the IELTS speaking course and IELTS writing course. So if you haven't seen them already, please go and watch those now. And I hope to see you in another video very soon.